So I've gone and done something really bad. Yu-Gi-Oh has had a bit of an up and down year in 2025, from higher highs like incredible new prize support changes and some very cool and well-designed decks from the set Justice Hunters, which are currently dominating the metagame. But we've also been plagued by some very egregious game-ending combos and floodgates for the last couple of months. Essentially, where the turn 2 player literally cannot play their deck. Konami took some drastic measures to address this with an emergency ban list, at least that's what the community has colloquially decided to call this. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster 2025. Imagine if the Elk Black Lotus Instant Planeswalker remained untouched. I think those were words. So having been completely bored of the stale, miserable Alice and Underground waifu mini adventure we have been forced to play on the online client, I decided to branch out a little bit into enemy territory. Sadly, I'm not quitting. Release me. Think of it more like performing a student exchange, a holiday. Instead of traveling to the Algarve in Portugal like a proper British bloke,
Alright, I've figured out how to fix the game.
I'll be walking the plains of Magic the Gathering Arena. You see, I've never fully invested my time and effort into Magic the Gathering. So many times I've heard how Magic is more strategic, which is usually code for not fun. Can Magic the Gathering hold the attention span of someone spoiled by the lack of activation requirements and resources? If Pokemon is checkers and Magic is chess, then Yu-Gi-Oh is Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So one day, I just downloaded it, completely blind, no articles, no primers, Twitter, YouTube videos or guides, the game tutorial, and jumping into ranked. Exactly how a completely new player might experience the game. Disclaimer! Wizards actually did sponsor me 7 years ago whenever Arena first came out or something. I did a 2-hour Magic stream back then for money. But as someone whose brain currently has 50 tabs open, 2 gigabytes of RAM and a CPU processor operating at 105 degrees Celsius, by the way, none of that information has been retained, and so I've basically just been wiped of any recollection of how to actually play this game. Or what a color is. The first impressions were... It wouldn't load for 2 minutes. It's just like playing Master Duel's online client, honestly. I restart to fix my client, and I am immediately assaulted with pop-ups, congratulating me for achieving Bronze 4 in November 2024? In 4 different formats. Apparently, I'm just this cracked. I don't know how I did this. Maybe I randomly opened the client up over a year ago. The 5 more windows about ban lists, rotations, and new packs before I even see the home screen. What is this, Duel Links? And it also featured a very hard to locate play button and a bunch of tabs, none of which have the words tutorial on it. Ultimately, I stumble onto the tutorial after clicking a bunch of tabs like a confused grandpa. It feels very unintuitive, but I mean, ultimately, I guess that's how online free-to-games look like these days when you haven't logged in since, like, the formation of Albania. And so I'm greeted by Sparky, a blue orb trying to drag me into some kind of roleplay. I'm given a white deck, and immediately my biggest nightmares come true. I became Caucasian. That is the first and last mandated color magic joke of the video. Let's move on. But I'm not going crazy, right? I'm not the only one who hears this, right? I play a land and pass. That's it. That's it. That's my turn 1. Which, I mean, is fine. It's the tutorial. Think of it as passing on a set giant soldier of stone. Powerful. New player stuff. Great gameplay for 2001. I think now it's time to talk about that thing. You see, while in Yu-Gi-Oh, you are not limited by any resource system. The only limiting resource is the card text itself, telling you if you can use it or not. There are some restrictions like 1 normal summon, 1 battle phase per turn, the actual hard once per turn effects on your physical cards, assuming some of them have any, but that's it. You are free to play your cards as and when they allow you to. In Magic, your cards require a certain amount of mana to play them, and you can play 1 land, a mana-inducing card, per turn. So ideally, you start your turn 1 with 1 mana, or land, being played, turn 2 with 2, and so on. But since lands are actually physically part of your deck that you must draw and activate as physical cards, you can run the risk of drawing too many, or too few. And for the better part of our millennial generation, every single card game that has ever kickstarted or rose and fell over many a year has tried to solve this mana problem, if there even is a mana problem in the first place. Yugioh straight up removed it. Hearthstone simply gave you it automatically without requiring an actual card, and we've seen other card games do every single thing in between. Is mana a good mechanic? Good and bad are subjective terms. Ultimately, I think the most important thing that I'm trying to do in this video is enjoying it from the perspective of the other side. Whether or not I like it is yet to be seen. I think that the important thing that this divide creates is that it makes my main game, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and then Magic the Gathering, fundamentally different games entirely. Playing with a limiting resources and then playing without a limiting resources, I mean, at that point, the only real comparison that you can make between these two games is that cards are involved. After learning some of the basic combat, I get the first tutorial down. Sparky urged me to finish the entire series of tutorials, and so I did. 5 total matches, and the second one being about attacking and blocking and a little bit more depth. The third one showing the fighting, the reach mechanic, and fourth one showcasing flash and instant. My final match was a combination of all of the mechanics in a showdown versus Nico Bellic. I think I made the same joke 7 years ago. We get paid for this type of comedy. That match felt like playing a real game. I had to stop and think multiple times, calculating my blocks, figuring out where to play my enchantments for optimal stats. After many turns of gameplay, I managed to win on my first try. So by this point, I guess I've just completed the equivalent perhaps of maybe a Yu-Gi-Oh! Structure deck duel, some GOAT format, and honestly, it was kind of refreshing. Magic feels very, I want to say, far more arithmetic-based than Yu-Gi-Oh!, which I'm not very quick at. So much of the skill in Magic, it feels like it comes from being able to calculate how well you can fight through the blocks, what you should and shouldn't block, what to take directly, and then counting all of that different mana cost up together. Different colors of mana compounding with other colors of mana or non-colors together. How much of that mana do I want to let spill over onto the next turn so that perhaps I can use an instant from my hand? While at the same time calculating all the different numbers on the field at any one time to decide whether or not it is worth attacking with a certain minion, because that minion can be blocked by any combination of other minions. You can kind of see what I'm saying here. There is so much arithmetic involved in Magic. Now, again, that's not to say it's difficult per se, it's just adding simple numbers together. But comparatively to Yu-Gi-Oh!, this was very different to me, because ultimately in Yu-Gi-Oh!, yeah, you sometimes calculate going for game, but turns in Yu-Gi-Oh! And matches in Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes aren't really decided by raw battle damage. You essentially just try and clear your opponent's board, and sometimes it's very hard to come back from that. There's pretty simple thresholds. Most decks can explosively put up far more than 8,000 required. I opened some free packs, got some wild cards, more on that crafting mechanic later, and I got flashbanged by a myriad of different formats. You know how there's like complaints about Master Duel having only really one format that's relevant? Well, Magic, I feel like maybe has the opposite issue. It has so many formats, it became really overwhelming as a first-time player to really try and understand which one was relevant, which one is good for me, which one I should try delve into, which one is the main one, what's popular, what isn't. And obviously the big one, I think, Commander, not being in the game. So that was obviously a little bit weird. So I don't know how a new player is supposed to navigate which of the 17 game modes is optimal for them. Fortunately, I had a Twitch chat coaching me somewhat, encouraging me to go for Midweek Magic, Phantom, Golden Sealed, and since it's free, I did so. I opened 6 packs for my sealed deck, and look at how many cards I'd have to read to even begin building a functional deck. So I decided to go for something else. God forbid we have to read our cards, huh? It's not that I'm complaining about reading my cards. It's that there is so much cognitive overload at the initial stage of the game. I have to read all of the cards, some of which have multiple effects, immediately memorizing all of those effects, processing those effects and their interactions with one another, deck build it myself as someone who has no idea how to best balance mana costs and ratios of land to monsters, to enchantments, to what win condition I'm trying to establish, what is the best way to strategize my deck, and then translating that all into a real gameplay scenario. All at the same time while having to get to grasp the actual fundamental rules of the game, like how I pay my mana. Can I actually block with a tapped creature? How much total cost will this turn be? Am I even paying the correct cost and color of this mana? All of these things combined together is a lot to process within a 30-second window of a duel. So, I sideline this one. Let's go do something a little bit simpler. I want to really solidify my foundational understanding of the mechanics of Magic before fully learning the intricacies of my actual card effects in my deck. Ideally, at this point, what I really should be doing is playing with the vanilla monsters, very basic stuff, to really try and familiarize myself with the turn structure, the gameplay loop of Magic. I decided to go with Twitch chat's recommendation of jump into Magic the Gathering, Final Fantasy instead. You're probably wondering, yeah, this video was recorded a while ago, I know. It seemed easier to start out with, and in this format, basically, you choose 2 themed packs of cards that go together and they form your deck. It doesn't include any deck building, so all I had to do was just read my cards, familiarize myself with them, and jump into some duels. I think removing that stressor of deck building was probably a very good idea in hindsight, and so it was time to queue up. For my first match, I got stream sniped. Yeah, stream sniping in Magic draft format. Like, what is this? I mulligan my first hand, and I keep 3 lands and what feels to me like a decent curve. It's a curve. See, words. Yeah, I'm basically a Magic pro at this point. My opponent went first, and we both did a gentleman turn 1, play land into pass. My opponent goes Iridia, Summoner of Mist. I played a tap land, not realizing I should have done it a turn earlier. I didn't have any mana for my play, so I took 2 damage, added a land to my pool, and finally had a play. A modest Tonberry. Slenderman answers with a Fenrir. I can't escape this card anywhere, can I? I promptly bounce it, but it sadly ate all my mana, and then the opponent summoned the fat Chocobo, and from there, despite my best efforts, I was too behind to come back into the game. So my first real match ending on the quickest L ever. For my second match, I mulligan again, and the game starts handsomely with back and forth lands. I get looped for 1 with Heck Dies, and I spend my next turn using Resentful Revelation to search for a card. And they summon a card that I also have in my hand. I play a Jill, bouncing my opponent's Loke Cole, even though that doesn't feel good. I'm just trying to gain some tempo, I think you guys call it. Wasp uses their turn to summon a creature, and on my turn, I make 2 tokens and decide to keep the Jill untapped for a potential block. See, learning the mechanics of the tapped, the untapped, the block, the summoning sickness, these are all things that are very, very new concepts to me in Yu-Gi-Oh! And having them be at the back of my mind constantly is just something that, you know, kind of had to always think about. The bounced Loke returns to the field, posing a threat once again. I swamp cycle, answer with my own Loke, and once again keep my blockers up. This game feels like it's going much better. My Loke gets destroyed, and I manage to block my opponent's attack, sacrificing my tokens to kill Loke. I put 2 more creatures onto the board, and on their turn, they spend all of their mana to summon 4 2/2 tokens. I swamp again, but I don't have any plays that develop my board. I take some damage, and I manage to summon Ultimisia, Time Sources, on my next turn, stacking my top deck. Unfortunately, it gets immediately bounced with my opponent's Jill. I decide not to block 6 damage, and I'm left on 9 to my opponent's 25. I summon Shinra Reinforcements, healing myself for 3, and hoping to hit creatures in my 3 mills for the final day synergy. Sadly, I don't have any. I retrieve 2 creatures with Fight On, but at this point, I'm still overwhelmed by reading the cards, the mechanics, and I can't seem to find the perfect way to play out my turn, either not floating mana or setting up my instant plays properly. This has still been so much more engaging, dare I say, fun, and it's all things that just come with some practice. I go down to 6 life, and it feels like the game is becoming more unwinnable as the turns go by. My board presence is just fading, and I can't keep up with the blocking or attacking. After 24 minutes of grinding, I succumb to my own trigger effect. Oh well, despite ending on a loss, this felt significantly better. I mean, I actually held my own for the most part. I didn't get completely stomped, and I'm starting to kind of understand what I'm doing wrong and how I can improve. And I think that was one thing that felt very different to Yu-Gi-Oh! Whenever you misplay in Yu-Gi-Oh!, it becomes really obvious because you either just straight up mess up your combo and then you can't keep playing, or you allow your opponent to get to a position where they never should have got to in the first place had you used a hand trap correctly. In Magic, misplaying feels so much more like a death by 1,000 cuts type of thing. And while it might not be very apparent immediately, some of your misplays can really affect things maybe like 5 turns, 10 turns later down the line. Simply just being 1 body behind on turn 3 can be the end of the match 10 turns later. It's very different in that way, and I don't know if one is better than the other. Yu-Gi-Oh! Certainly can have matches like that, but just the pace of the game naturally feels like Magic is just going to be a little bit sometimes harder to kind of decipher where you're going wrong, unless you do something like egregiously incorrect. But do I play this card or that card for the same mana cost? Sometimes that can feel very sort of like hindsight 2020, much later compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! The gameplay of Magic at this point feels so much more surgical, I think, than Yu-Gi-Oh! While Yu-Gi-Oh! Maintains this supersonic, fast-paced gameplay, which involves, I want to say, so much more homework than Magic, it felt like. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Sometimes I find myself kind of fighting against myself to just learn my combos, especially combo decks that have like, you know, we're talking like 30 plus steps activations and cards in sequence in a specific order that you need to kind of do to really understand fully what your 2-card turn 1 can look like. And then you gotta maybe learn some other combos that play through a Nibiru, for example, rather than so much as engaging with my opponent's full hand, at least not to the degree that I was feeling with Magic. Since rotation is in a few weeks, I'm pretty much looking for a deck that isn't just going to instantly die. Yeah, so I recorded this like 2 weeks before Edge of Eternity. Crazy name, by the way. So, stick with me here. You see, unlike Yu-Gi-Oh!, Magic is a rotating game, meaning sets only stay legal for a certain period, 3 years for standard, after which you cannot play them in the standard format anymore. This is a system completely different to how Yu-Gi-Oh's card pool functions. Now imagine in Yu-Gi-Oh! You could only play cards printed from 2024 onwards up until now, and then maybe we would have like a 2-year window where all cards legal in 24-25 would be legal for those 2 years, and then 26, 27, etc., etc. I mean, obviously there's fluctuations depending on the standard deviation of how many years, months, sets Konami would want to implement hypothetically, but the idea is that you can only play for the cards and archetypes within a certain time frame. Now, obviously, the biggest positive that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can offer with that is that your deck, your archetype, your pet little functional sort of enjoyable archetype can be played at any moment in time ever, with cards coming in out of the format like Book of Moon from 20 plus years ago suddenly finding their way into the meta again, like we did, for example, in Pearly format a couple months back. That all sounds well and cool. Now, the negative of that, obviously, is that you aren't really going to be able to, play your pet deck after a while. And keeping on top of the game is probably going to be significantly more expensive, as you're going to have to essentially rebuy an entire collection every couple of years if you want to keep up with the cutting-edge competitive landscape of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Gathering. So there really isn't a correct answer here. What I will argue, however, is, unfortunately, on the side of Team Magic, I think that's probably the better outcome. In my opinion, Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of already has a invisible rotating format. Konami are very heavy-handed in how they hit archetypes and decks, especially after the World Championship season. Although this Vanquish Soul one was apparently a complete fluke, they seem to have murdered it on the surface level, and then it ended up, being the best deck again. But in general, a deck, an archetype, just completely dies off, and you don't see it again until years later when its power crept and essentially becomes a shadow of its former self, and maybe they give it some support in the future. More recently, best example I can think of is like Dragon Rulers. Their absolute peak in the heyday was almost 15 years ago at this point, and they've just been brought back to 3 copies. I don't actually even know if they're at 3 copies in the TCG. I think in Master Duel they are, and they've gotten some new support, which is okay, but it's not like the meta-breaking tier 0 threat that they once were. For me, it's just that what I don't like seeing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is decks that are just banned and nerfed so hard that they become completely unplayable. Whereas if we had a rotating format, we would know and expect when to expect that deck to be on its way out. Magic features a crafting system based on wildcards. You can obtain them in various ways, from finding them in a pack to reaching certain milestones in your collection or the number of packs opened. Now, what's different from Master Duel is you cannot disenchant your cards. Say you have a Labyrinth deck you don't want to play anymore. You wouldn't be able to just dust it and use that dust towards a brand new Malice deck. Once you use wildcards, they're gone and there's no way of retrieving them. You just have to go and pull new ones. You can purchase them for real money, but the price seems pretty steep. The scarcest currency in Magic Arena are wild rares. While you only need a limited amount of mythics in your deck, rares are the most widely used in a deck, and with a lot of them being used for good land cards, such as chalk lands, I think they're called. If you don't have enough, you have to play bad lands, like tap lands, which enter tapped. I think I got that right. Now, I didn't engage with this system too much, like I said, because my account just, for some reason, just had a bunch of, rares and stuff stacked from ages ago, which I think is good in Arena because your wild cards and mythics don't rotate out. That would have been disastrous. So I never actually crafted a meta deck in Magic. I just sort of saved them up from a bunch of random pack openings and promo codes and things like that. I was going to build one many years ago, but I just never played the game long enough. So I just had a bunch stacked up and I was ready to play Rakdos aggro. I think that's what it's called. It's literally just the tenpai of Magic. It's very funny. It was a low commitment strategy that is very easy to play, and so this was a great way to break into the competitive scene. I quickly read through the cards and I realized that they're simple, with the effects mostly focusing on gaining attack and dealing damage. I suppose by now I'd probably be considered a veteran card game player. I have practiced or tried to learn a card game from scratch multiple times at this point, so I kind of have like a developed system somewhat and understand how to best approach it. By focusing on the red deck, which mechanically seems to be the easiest and simple archetype to play in Magic, it meant that during duels, during actual games, my cognitive load turn to turn could focus on the mechanics of what I'm doing. Activating lands, tapping them, the phasing, understanding the combat structure fully, rather than splitting my brain power equally with trying to understand how to actually do my combo. Imagine trying to learn the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Phasing, damage step, how to actually interact with a monster during the battle phase, once per turn effects, timing, PSET, all of that different stuff, but at the same time you're trying to learn how to actually combo your deck. As a veteran Yu-Gi-Oh player, there are some decks that are very difficult to learn. Now, some decks are easier than others. Like, for example, the Yu-Gi-Oh community for some reason thought Salamangreat, a Cyberse deck, was a good idea to let Raron learn. That was hilarious. Good job, guys. So definitely, in my opinion, the best approach was playing something like this red deck to give me the easiest way to focus on functionally learning Magic. Then I can start to fully focus and kind of envelop myself into learning how the deck works. When learning to do anything new in a video game, the focus on mechanics to build a foundational understanding is far more important than trying to simultaneously get a grasp of the strategy. And I think this was a great way to learn Magic. Which brings me to my next choice, Magic's choice of decks. Magic has 4 unique colors: red, black, white, and green. And what I really liked about Magic is that these 4 colors at their absolute basic level play very similarly to their colored counterparts. Blue decks generally all sort of share the same playstyle of trying to float mana, disruption, instants. Black has a lot of sacrificing, grave reliance, token generation, probably why it kind of felt like it might have been my favorite color. Imagine Tearlaments or Lightsworn, but worse, I guess. Then there's green, which kind of ramps its mana quickly. It can do like minion generation, spit out big minions, toxic damage. And then there's white, which, yep. And of course, what I picked, red. I mulligan away a little too much mana, and I end up with 1 mountain. I don't draw anything in 5 turns, and I concede. Yep. Imagine declaring an attack with Chandra, and then not activating Chandra. That was my deck. That was my 5 turns. Okay, but after the incident, it was time for the stomping grounds. Now, rather than just making this an entire like replay highlight, let me go into a little bit of details of one of my more interesting matches. It was actually the last ranked game I played. I queued up into this one and didn't brick. I kept my hand again. And it's starting to feel like in Magic, to be honest. I mean, it could be archetype dependent, but it feels like if you don't brick, just keep your hand. Yu-Gi-Oh does not have a mulligan function. You see, just because of the sorry, Magic players, bricky nature of Magic decks, you can be flooded with just way too much mana and not enough actual cards that like fully utilizes them. Or you can have too little land and you just aren't curving your turns properly. So there's just like this paradox in like the functionality at the core level of the deck. Like it's just like a sort of flaw that's built into the game itself. And I believe they've tried to alleviate that in recent years by making lands that do stuff. But at least in the deck I played, it didn't really feel like that was a thing. It was just a case of you have to draw balance of engine versus land. So this time I was up against a blue-green, and my opponent develops a flying 1/1 Spectral Sailor. I plot a Ruckus. The opponent plays another Spectral Sailor, and Mild-Mannered Librarian and pokes for 1. And they have a lot of potential blockers here. I play a Red Mage's Rapier, summoning a 1/1 token, and they follow up with a 1/3 Druid of the Cowl, poke me for 2, and pass. I boost my token to 5/1, and develop 2 Monastery Swift Spears. They block both, and I end up not attacking with a token, realizing it would just die. My token was removed with Exclusion Mage anyway. I'm falling terribly behind on tempo. Regardless, I don't give up. I play a Scamp and hope for the best. I get poked down to 9 and probably won't attack ever again into my opponent's board. Luckily, I top deck a Mountain, which puts me on 4 mana. With 2 Demonic Ruckus plotted and a Callous Sellsword in hand, I have game on board. I equip Red Mage's Rapier on Scamp for 3 mana, and I play both plotted Demonic Ruckus on it, taking it to 7-3. Attack for 7, which they don't block, taking them from 18 to 11, which ultimately doesn't matter. I finish my turn with Callous Sellsword and sacrificing my 9-3 to deal 9, and then Scamp's ability triggers, dealing another 9. XDD! After a bunch of misplays somehow, and learning how, I suppose, like, the equips and stuff work, I managed to take down a W for my last game. Utilizing the burn damage and the big hits, honestly, I can understand why people don't like this strategy, but I want to say, like, thematically, the way that this worked is amazing. It's perfect. Like, Magic does such a good job of making the deck feel like its theme and its color. Maybe that isn't true for the other things, but at least with this, it felt like this is what quintessential red is. And again, even if you don't personally like the playstyle, I just think from a design perspective, it is really beautiful how well that has just been designed. Like, it feels like you are playing that color. But even in terms of how fun it was, something really cathartic about just hitting your opponent really hard. One of the things that I appreciate about Magic so much is, this is going to be controversial to you Yu-Gi-Oh players, but keywords. I love keywords. Keywords are so good, and I don't understand why this is like the garlic to a vampire whenever I talk to Yu-Gi-Oh players.
Actually, Yu-Gi-Oh has too much technical nuance to incorporate keywords like when, if, on normal summon, or special summon.
Just make it simpler then. I don't care if we delete when. I don't care if adding Battle Cry to a card can't differentiate between a normal and a special summon. Just make it both. Design cards in a healthy way to balance it accordingly. I don't care if a card literally just says Death Touch, Foolish, Piercing. I think it would be an incredible barrier to entry lifted by the game. Don't get me wrong. Keywords are obviously very overwhelming to a new player. Even myself, I was constantly forgetting the more niche ones that showed up one in like every 20 games, and I would have to Google it in the middle of a duel. Yu-Gi-Oh has the advantage, of course, where everything you need to understand about a card is technically just written on the card. Magic makes you go and do homework to find out how your cards work. But once you've memorized Menace, Hexproof, Trample, you never think about it again. And to be fucking fair, man, half of them are pretty self-explanatory. If you've watched this far somehow and you have never touched Magic in your entire life, what do you think haste does? Yeah, that's right, gotta go fast. I have become speed. It can attack the turn it's summoned. Ooh. My biggest problem with Yu-Gi-Oh cards is how there's like no bullet points, separation between the effects. It has a whole ass coding language called PSET, baked into every card. Now, playing Master Duel is significantly easier than TCG when it comes to card text, because you might not have noticed this, but in Master Duel, the card effects are literally paragraphed out. It's not the same as a physical card. While limited in time, this experience taught me a lot about Magic the Gathering. I ended with a record of 7-1, which would guarantee me day 2 at a YCS. That's pretty good, right? Ultimately, this game is way more fun than I expected it to be, so let's talk about a couple of issues. I didn't dive into the whole affordability of Magic, but what I will say is that I just don't have a good idea of how much keeping up with and playing a bunch of decks in Arena can actually cost you. My only reference is Hearthstone and Master Duel and Duel Links. While Magic isn't exactly Duel Links, for the predatory idea of gacha games, not being able to dismantle and reuse dust definitely felt like it. I mean, just mathematically, that has to make it somewhat expensive, right? Long term. In Master Duel, we have events and daily missions and stuff. With Arena, I guess I just haven't played it long enough to get a full grasping and understanding of the economics. But from just what I've heard from friends in Twitch chat, basically, it seems like, yeah, like Magic the Gathering does just have more maintenance associated with it in terms of like buying into the new format or playing new decks and stuff. I would have loved to have tried a black deck. I think the theme, lore, mechanics seemed to really call to me, but ultimately, I just didn't want to drop a bunch of money on a 1-week experiment. But I really do feel like I have nothing but praise and reverence for Magic. As a pillar of one of the big three, it's very obvious why so many people like this game. You don't need me to validate that, obviously. And it's a game that I will very likely never play again. The biggest number one point that I want to make is mana is not for me. Hearthstone, I feel like, did a good job of solving the mechanic. Other games let you just cheat it out. Digimon have had their own interpretation of it. One Piece uses Dawn, where you can use mana as attack if you don't want to use more mana than necessary. Star Wars lets you literally like draw your mana as like card advantage, or like put cards into your resource pile as mana. Every card game under the sun has, you know, tried to fix this issue of mana. Yu-Gi-Oh simply stripped off the yoke and said no. There's no activation requirement or restriction to your cards other than the card itself. There is no cost associated with it, and that to me personally, again, totally subjective, makes for a more fun game. I like that all of my cards at any one time can potentially be used to do a combo. I like Magic. It's a different way to approach the game. You're thinking about things differently, but it's not Yu-Gi-Oh! And with a lifestyle that is limited in time, finances, I gotta put my resources where they make sense. And as much as I actually really loved Magic, it's just I'm not in a position to take up another card game altogether, especially one where I just think that such a critical limiting factor of the game, mana, is never going to be as fun as Yu-Gi-Oh! To me personally, in my opinion. Now, I would love to try and do some drafts or something, or play Magic with friends, and if it ever comes up, I'll definitely give it a shot, but I don't see myself heading out as a you know, stranger to a local game store with people I've met before to try and play Magic or something. I'm sure it'd be a very fun, friendly experience, but it's just not something I would feel comfortable with doing for something that I just don't think I would ever be as passionate about as Yu-Gi-Oh! I cannot understate enough just how much better it is to not have a resource system in general. Don't get me wrong, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has plenty of problems because of the fact there is no resource system, but more often than not, the lack of a resource system is what makes it more fun rather than less fun to me personally. Thank you so much everyone for watching this far. If you like this type of long form content, please leave a like. It's the best way to show that you've engaged with the video. Leave a comment as well potentially, and if you really want to support me so I can do more projects like this that are bigger and more long-term and crazier, then consider becoming a channel member and donating once a month to the YouTube. You get all these cool customizable emotes, etc. I guess it would have been cool to talk to like another Magic player about this more so than anything, but these are my thoughts. Maybe I've missed something immense here and I'm going to be torn down for it. Hopefully not, and I've been balanced and as charitable as I can be where possible. So, peace out. I'll see you in the next one.